Waterworld was the ocean turned into a battlefield. Ships sank, crews scattered, millions vanished into the waves. But beneath the storms, it was survival at its breaking point. Sets that didn't survive the sea, weeks lost in script hell, and a desert vision drowned and reborn. These are 20 weird facts about Waterworld. And hidden beneath the waves and the wreckage, it was Hollywood's most infamous gamble. The ocean tried to sink it, but the legend kept floating. Number 1. When Waterworld began, the numbers looked manageable. Universal budgeted around $100 million, with a tight 96-day shoot. But the ocean had other plans. Sets sank. Storms rolled in without warning. Scenes had to be rebuilt, reshot, restarted. Every delay sent the budget climbing like a wave. Within months, whispers spread. The film was spiraling out of control. Steven Spielberg, who had wrestled with the sea during Jaws, had once warned director Kevin Reynolds, never shoot on open water. Reynolds ignored it, and the Pacific punished him. What should have been contained became endless. The atoll floated like a cork. Actors staggered on swells. Cameras tilted and slipped. Each day dragged dollars down with the tide. By the end, the cost had nearly doubled to a rumored $175 million, a figure that made headlines before the movie even opened. Suddenly, Waterworld wasn't a film, it was a scandal. Reporters christened it the most expensive movie ever made, a cautionary tale about Hollywood arrogance. And until Titanic came along to sink its record, the title stuck. For nearly a decade, the word Waterworld didn't just mean a film, it meant disaster. Number 2. Most movies would have faked it with miniatures or CGI. Waterworld didn't. Universal built a 1,000-ton floating atoll in Hawaii's Kauai Harbor, an engineering marvel of steel, cranes, and tugboats. It was the size of a small town and just as heavy. But out at sea, it was never steady. When the tide rose, the entire city bobbed like a cork. Cameras tilted, horizons slipped, and actors stumbled through dialogue as if they'd been drinking. Every wave threatened the illusion. Crews fought back with sandbags, cables, and brute strength, but nothing could tame the Pacific. Takes were ruined, props were lost, and reshoots piled up. What looked like a futuristic fortress on screen was, for those trapped inside, a floating prison. No land, no escape, just miles of water on every side. Even Dennis Hopper joked that the real villain wasn't the smokers, it was the sea itself. Number 3. The Pacific wasn't just a backdrop, it was the enemy. Sudden storms rolled in and tore the set apart. Whole sections of the floating colony vanished beneath the waves, dragging cameras and gear down with them. Millions of dollars gone in hours. Production halted as divers scrambled to salvage what they could. Crews worked day and night to rebuild, hammering steel under a blazing sun while schedules collapsed around them. Actors and stunt performers took the brunt. Rough surf swallowed lines, flipped boats, and tossed bodies into the swell. Safety divers raced to pull them back before the current carried them out to sea. Kevin Reynolds had ignored Spielberg's old warning after Jaws, never shoot on open water. Now the lesson hit with every storm. The chaos you see on screen, waves, wrecks, sheer desperation, wasn't fiction. It was survival, captured by accident. Number 4. For the film's most dangerous moments, the crew turned to surfing legend Laird Hamilton, who doubled for Kevin Costner. He launched jet skis into the air, flipped them over waves, and dove into black water like it was second nature. But even with pros, the stunts flirted with disaster. Engines stalled mid-chase, leaving riders drifting helplessly. Waves slammed boats into each other. Crew members were battered and bruised. One chase ended with a jet ski disappearing entirely, drifting miles off course before being recovered. For days, insurance reps hovered, warning that one bad crash could end it all. Yet Costner pushed for realism, training to handle the trimaran and doing as much of the action as he could. It gave the mariner authenticity, but it left the star sunburned, exhausted, and one accident away from catastrophe. The line between fiction and survival blurred every time they rolled camera. Number 5. The mariner's trimaran wasn't one boat, it was an armada. Designers built multiple versions, each engineered with its own tricks. Retractable masts, folding sails, hidden blades, even spring-loaded parts that snapped open like a Swiss Army knife. Kevin Costner trained to sail them himself, insisting the hero look authentic in every shot. But the ocean didn't care about authenticity. Winds shredded canvas, waves splintered rigging, and carefully rehearsed stunts turned into sudden emergencies. More than once, Costner was left bruised, battered, and soaked after the trimaran bucked against the current. On screen, the boat looked like a futuristic machine, part myth and part miracle. Behind the scenes, it was just as unpredictable, a co-star that demanded respect. Number 6. Waterworld didn't just battle the ocean, it battled its own story. The script had been passed around for years, rewritten by a carousel of writers until no one knew whose version was whose. By the time cameras rolled in Hawaii, it was still changing. New pages arrived almost daily. Whole scenes were ripped apart and reassembled under the sun. Universal flew in Joss Whedon for an emergency rescue. He was supposed to polish dialogue, maybe punch up a few jokes. Instead, he found himself trapped in chaos. 7 weeks later, he called it the worst writing experience of my life. Every morning, the actors were handed new lines. By the afternoon, those same lines were gone. Directors and producers argued over tone. Costner fought for control. The story shifted like the tide, never steady. What emerged was a patchwork stitched together under brutal conditions. Some moments worked, others felt adrift, but all of it carried the scars of compromise. On screen, the ocean looked endless. Behind the scenes, the rewrites felt just as deep, a whirlpool that nearly swallowed the film before the cameras ever stopped rolling. Number 7. The movie didn't just wrestle with water and rewrites. Even the music became a battleground. Kevin Costner rejected composer Mark Isham's moody, ethnic-infused score. Too bleak, he said, too strange. He wanted adventure, not art house. Isham was fired, and with the release date looming, James Newton Howard stepped in. In just weeks, he delivered a sweeping orchestral score filled with momentum and grandeur. The shift was dramatic, from shadows and dread to something bold enough to ride waves. It was less subtle, but more in line with a blockbuster trying to stay afloat. Without Howard, Waterworld might have sounded like a slow drown. Instead, it surged with brass, drums, and a tide big enough to carry the story forward. Number 8. Even before Waterworld opened, the media had already decided it was doomed. Reporters circled the production like sharks, feeding on rumors of ballooning budgets and sinking sets. Every storm delay became a headline. Every clash between Costner and Reynolds turned into copy. By the summer of 1995, Waterworld wasn't just a movie, it was a punchline. The nicknames came fast. Kevin's Gate, Fishtar, each one evoking past Hollywood disasters, from Heaven's Gate to Ishtar. Costner, once untouchable after Dances with Wolves, suddenly looked like the face of arrogance, the star drowning in his own vanity project. Journalists didn't wait for audiences. They declared it a flop before a single ticket was sold. When the movie finally opened at number 1, the numbers didn't matter. The story had already been written. For weeks, late-night comedians and entertainment columns mocked it as the biggest disaster in Hollywood history. Waterworld had been branded a failure before it ever had a chance. The box office would tell a different story, but the legend of Kevin's Gate had already taken hold, a storm the film could never outrun. Number 9. For years, Waterworld carried the label of Hollywood's greatest flop. Headlines mocked it, late-night hosts tore it apart, and the story stuck. But the truth? The numbers weren't nearly so dire. In the US, it pulled in around $88 million. Disappointing compared to its budget, but far from a wipeout. Overseas, audiences showed up in larger numbers, adding another $176 million. By the end of its theatrical run, the worldwide total stood at about $264 million. And then came home video. VHS rentals, DVD sales, and television rights kept rolling in. Slowly, steadily, the film crawled into profit. It never became the smash Universal wanted, but it wasn't the financial catastrophe the press demanded either. The myth of biggest flop ever wasn't born from the box office. It was born from ridicule. Number 10. Few films can claim this kind of whiplash. Waterworld earned recognition at both the Academy Awards and the Golden Raspberries in the same year. Hollywood didn't know whether to applaud or laugh. At the 1996 Oscars, it scored a nomination for Best Sound, a nod to the thunder of waves, explosions, and roaring engines that shook theaters. But days later, the Razzies dragged it through the surf, handing out 4 nominations: Worst Picture, Worst Director, and Worst Actor for Kevin Costner. The only win went to Dennis Hopper as Worst Supporting Actor. His villain judged more cartoon than menace. It was the film's split personality in a nutshell. One moment hailed for technical craft, the next mocked as excess and ego. Waterworld floated between triumph and disaster, managing to be both at once. Number 11. For Kevin Costner, Waterworld wasn't just another starring role. It was an obsession. He spent 157 days on set, often 6 days a week, refusing to hand key moments to doubles. If the mariner dove, Costner dove. If the trimaran snapped in the wind, he clung to it. The Hawaiian sun blistered his skin. Salt water left sores across his body. Still, he kept showing up. The crew grew exhausted. Extras rotated. Stuntmen collapsed. Directors fought for control. But Costner remained, staring down the endless horizon like it was a personal challenge. His commitment gave the mariner a weathered authenticity. A man surviving not just in story, but in reality. Yet that same obsession created fractures. Reynolds wanted mystery, but Costner's relentless drive shaped the film in his own image. He argued edits, rewrote dialogue, pushed scenes until they bent his way. By the time shooting ended, the friendship between star and director had washed away with the tide. What was left was a film scarred by conflict, and a performance carved out of sun, salt, and stubborn willpower. Number 12. Waterworld didn't appear out of nowhere. Its DNA came straight from Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior. Writer Peter Rader openly admitted he lifted the template wholesale. A lone wanderer drifting through through a post-apocalyptic wasteland, scavengers swarming on fast machines, a fragile society under siege. Only this time, instead of sand and engines, it was waves and sails. The desert flipped to the sea. The endless dust became endless water. For years, the script was passed around as a low-budget imitation, the kind of movie studios might crank out for drive-ins. Some producers even eyed it for a quick cash grab knockoff, no more than a B-movie curiosity. But then Kevin Costner saw it. Fresh off Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves and Dances with Wolves, he had the clout to turn it into something bigger. Universal opened the vaults. Suddenly, what began as a dusty shadow of Mad Max swelled into the most expensive ocean epic Hollywood had ever attempted. And yet, that lineage never washed away. From the leather-clad smokers roaring on jet skis to the lone drifter with no home but his trimaran, Waterworld was still Mad Max at heart. Only wetter, wilder, and on a scale the desert could never contain. Number 13. By the time Waterworld began, Kevin Costner and director Kevin Reynolds weren't strangers. They'd already shared 3 films: Fandango, Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, and Rapa Nui. Together they had built hits and weathered flops, forging a bond closer to brothers than co-workers. But the ocean tested everything. Reynolds envisioned the mariner as mysterious, a near-mythic drifter who spoke little, lived on instinct, and kept his soul hidden. Costner disagreed. He wanted the character to be a swashbuckler, someone audiences could root for, not fear. That creative tug-of-war stretched across every scene. When Reynolds leaned toward silence, Costner pushed for dialogue. When Reynolds asked for shadows, Costner argued for light. The tension wore them both down. By the time production wrapped, Reynolds walked away, exhausted and bitter. Costner finished the edit himself, shaping the film in his image. Their partnership, once a creative engine, broke apart on the tide. Waterworld wasn't just another chapter in their collaboration, it was the one that drowned their friendship. Number 14. When Waterworld finally reached theaters, no one doubted its scale. The horizon stretched forever. The floating atoll felt lived in, battered by sun and salt. The trimaran folded and snapped like a machine designed in some forgotten future. Visually, the film was breathtaking, but when the spectacle faded, the story underneath felt waterlogged. Critics pointed to muddled pacing, thin motives, and logic that collapsed if you stared too long. Was the mariner a hero or a drifter? Were the smokers terrifying or absurd? The script never fully decided. Reviewers praised the ambition but mocked the storytelling, calling it a film that looked extraordinary and yet stumbled in its own wake. In the end, Waterworld became the rare blockbuster remembered more for the world it built than the tale it told, a paradise of detail wrapped around a story that couldn't quite stay afloat. Number 15. The filmmakers didn't just build boats and floating cities, they tried to build a culture. In the background of Waterworld, you can hear scraps of a hybrid tongue the crew called Portugreek or Portugreco, a mash of Portuguese, Greek, and scavenged slang. Actors muttered it in market scenes, traders scrawled it on signs, and props carried fragments of a language that had never existed before. It was a world where old nations had drowned, but their voices washed together into something new. Most audiences never noticed. Subtitles rarely translated it, and dialogue moved too quickly to linger. But the detail was there, a reminder that dryland wasn't the only thing lost. So were centuries of language, condensed into a dialect born out of survival. It was texture most viewers missed, but one that gave the drowned future its own heartbeat. Number 16. When Waterworld hit theaters, it ran just over 2 hours, but buried in vaults was a longer version fans whispered about, nearly half an hour of footage unseen. Eventually released on television and home video, it became known as the Ulysses Cut. The extra reels filled in character beats and world building, from darker smoker scenes to the revelation of the mariner's true name, Ulysses. It reframed him not as a drifting loner, but as a mythic wanderer destined to keep searching. For diehard fans, this cut felt like the truer vision, more ambitious, more complete than the patchwork that limped into theaters. And tucked into both versions, if you look closely, is a surprise cameo, a young Jack Black, unrecognizable behind goggles, screaming through the sky as a smoker pilot. In a film about lost worlds, even the movie itself ended up with 2 lives. Number 17. Hollywood may have mocked the film, but Universal Studios found a way to make Waterworld unsinkable. Just weeks after the movie's release in 1995, they unveiled Waterworld, a live sea war spectacular, a stunt show that turned the chaos of the film into pure adrenaline. Exploding seaplanes roared overhead, jet skis skidded across water, and towering fireballs erupted so close audiences felt the heat on their faces. It was Waterworld stripped of its messy plot and distilled into thrills, performed several times a day for packed crowds. And while the movie faded into punchlines, the show endured. It's still running decades later in Hollywood, Japan, Singapore, and Beijing. Longer than the film has been in theaters, longer than many franchises survive. In the end, the movie may have sunk at release, but the spectacle kept sailing. A strange afterlife where the attraction outlived the thing that inspired it. Number 18. Universal thought Waterworld could ride the same wave as Jurassic Park. Toy aisles flooded with action figures from Kenner, some recycled from their Robin Hood line and painted over with seawater grit. There were smokers, trimarans, even playsets of the floating atoll, all waiting to turn a flop into a franchise. Comics carried the story further. Acclaim published Children of Leviathan and other spin-offs, imagining darker corners of the drowned Earth. And arcades? Gottlieb rolled out a massive pinball machine, its ramp splashed with crashing waves, its bumpers rigged to explode like smokers' attacks. The merchandise never became iconic. Shelves soon cleared, comics faded, pinball cabinets gathered dust. But for one strange summer in 1995, the apocalypse had its own toy line, its own spin-offs, its own flashing arcade machine. Waterworld may have sunk at the box office, but in the marketplace, it briefly looked like a world built to last. Number 19. Even as the film was sinking, Waterworld kept drifting into arcades and consoles. Ocean Software rolled out tie-ins for the Super Nintendo, Game Boy, and even Nintendo's doomed Virtual Boy, the only movie game that system ever saw. Players piloted jet skis, battled smokers, and searched endlessly for dryland, usually with clunky controls and endless waves of frustration. Sega planned Genesis and Saturn versions, but both were scrapped before release. On PC, the quest for dryland arrived in 1997, promising more freedom but delivering the same watery grind. None of them became classics. The Virtual Boy cartridge is remembered more as a collector's oddity than a game, but together they proved something ironic. Even when audiences mocked the movie, the world it imagined still begged to be explored. For kids holding controllers, the hunt for dryland wasn't just on screen, it was pixelated, blocky, and nearly impossible to win. Number 20. When Waterworld splashed into theaters in 1995, critics mocked it as cartoonish. Melting ice caps, drowned cities, oceans swallowing the earth. It felt like pulp dressed up as prophecy. But decades later, the film plays differently. Rising seas and violent storms no longer feel like science fiction. The very images once dismissed as silly now echo in nightly news footage of flooded coastlines and vanishing ice shelves. Behind the jet skis, explosions, and floating fortresses, the story was always a warning, a vision of what happens when humanity ignores the water at its door. It may not have been the message audiences wanted in the 90s, but today its caution feels chillingly close. What once looked like excess now looks like foresight, a blockbuster drowning in spectacle, but swimming toward truth. Bonus fact: for adults in 1995, Waterworld was a Hollywood punchline, bloated, overhyped, and ridiculed in headlines. But for kids, it was magic. On VHS, the ocean epic found a second life. Salt-stained tapes were rewound endlessly at sleepovers. Bathtubs turned into trimarans. Bikes became smoker jet skis. Toy aisles carried action figures and playsets, even if most were kit-bashed from old molds. Arcades lit up with pinball machines splashed in crashing waves. For a generation growing up in the 90s, Waterworld wasn't failure. It was a world to live inside. And today, those kids are grown. They defend the movie online, cheer its stunt shows, and insist it was never the flop history claimed. Because for them, Waterworld wasn't just a headline or a budget joke. It was childhood, and childhood always finds dryland. Waterworld was mocked as a punchline, too expensive, too chaotic, too doomed to sail. But the storm didn't sink it. Piece by piece, it endured. On VHS shelves, in stunt shows, through toys, and in the fans who never let it drown. Kevin Costner bet everything on a sea without end, and in the long tide of time, he won more than numbers. He won memory. If this film still drifts through your imagination, drop a comment. Tell us what legendary story we should dive into next, because what was once called a flop is now remembered as prophecy. And in its own way, Waterworld found its dryland, not on screen, but in the hearts of those who never stopped searching.